had burst through the last barrier, and disclosed a zone of straw. In a moment they were kneeling side by side, engaged like haymakers. The next they were rewarded with a glimpse of something white and polished, and the next again laid bare an unmistakable marble leg. "He is surely a very athletic person," said Julia. "I never saw anything like it," responded Gideon. "His muscles stand out like penny rolls." Another leg was soon disclosed, and then what seemed to be a third. This resolved itself, however, into a knotted club resting upon a pedestal. "It's a Hercules!" cried Gideon. "I might have guessed that from his calf. I'm supposed to be rather partial to statuary, but when it comes to Hercules the police should interfere. I should say," he added, glancing with disaffection at the swollen leg, "that this was about the biggest and the worst in Europe. What in heaven's name can have induced him to come here?" "I suppose nobody else would have a gift of him," said Julia; "and for that matter I think we could have done without the monster very well." "Oh, don't say that," returned Gideon. "This has been one of the most amusing experiences of my life." "I don't think you'll forget it very soon," said Julia. "Your hand will remind you." "Well, I suppose I must be going," said Gideon reluctantly. "No," pleaded Julia. "Why should you? Stay and have tea with me." "If I thought you really wished me to stay," said Gideon, looking at his hat, "of course I should only be too delighted." "What a silly person you must take me for!" returned the girl. "Why, of course I do; and besides I want some cakes for tea, and I've nobody to send. Here is a latch key." Gideon put on his hat with alacrity, and casting one look at Miss Hazeltine, and another at the legs of Hercules, threw open the door and departed on his errand. He returned with a large bag of the choicest and most tempting of cakes and tartlets, and found Julia in the act of spreading a small tea table in the lobby. "The rooms are all in such a state," she cried, "that I thought we should be more cosy and comfortable in our own lobby and under our own vine and statuary." "Ever so much better," cried Gideon delightedly. "Oh, what adorable cream tarts!" said Julia, opening the bag. "And the dearest little cherry tartlets, with all the cherries spilling out into the cream." "Yes," said Gideon, concealing his dismay. "I knew they would mix beautifully. The woman behind the counter told me so." "Now," said Julia, as they began their little festival, "I'm going to show you Morris's letter. Read it aloud, please, because perhaps there's something I have missed." Gideon took the letter, and, spreading it out on his knee, read as follows: "Dear Julia, I write you from Browndean, where we are stopping over for a few days. Uncle was much shaken in that dreadful accident, of which I dare say you have seen the account. Tomorrow I leave him here with John, and come up alone; but before that you will have received a barrel containing specimens for a friend. Do not open it on any account, but leave it in the lobby till I come. Yours in haste, M. Finsbury. P.S. Be sure and leave the barrel in the lobby." "No," said Gideon, "there seems to be nothing about the monument." And he nodded, as he spoke, at the marble legs. "Miss Hazeltine," he continued, "would you mind my asking a few questions?" "Certainly not," replied Julia. "And if you can make me understand why Morris has sent a statue of Hercules instead of a barrel containing specimens for a friend, I shall be grateful till my dying day." "And what are specimens for a friend?" "I haven't a guess," said Gideon. "Specimens are usually bits of stone, but rather smaller than our friend the monument. Still, that's not the point. Are you quite alone in this big house?" "Yes, I am at present," returned Julia. "I came up before them to prepare the house, and to get another servant, but I couldn't get one I liked." "Then you are utterly alone?" said Gideon in amazement. "Are you not afraid?" "No," responded Julia stoutly. "I don't see why I should be more afraid than you would be. I'm weaker, of course, but when I found I must sleep alone in the house, I bought a revolver, wonderfully cheap, and made the man show me how to use it." "And how do you use it?" demanded Gideon, much amused at her courage. "Why," said she, with a smile, "you pull the little trigger thing on top, and then, pointing it very low, for it springs up as you fire, you pull the underneath little trigger thing. and it goes off as well as if a man had done it." "And how often have you used it?" asked Gideon. "Oh, I have not used it yet," said the determined young lady, "but I know how, and that makes me wonderfully courageous, especially when I barricade my door with a chest of drawers." "I'm awfully glad they are coming back soon," said Gideon. "This business strikes me as excessively unsafe. If it goes on much longer, I could provide you with a maiden aunt of mine, or my landlady, if you preferred." "Lend me an aunt!" cried Julia. "Oh, what generosity! I begin to think it must have been you that sent the Hercules." "Believe me," cried the young man, "I admire you too much to send you such an infamous work of art." Julia was beginning to reply, when they were both startled by a knocking at the door. "Oh, Mr Forsyth!" "Don't be afraid, my dear girl," said Gideon, laying his hand tenderly on her arm. "I know it's the police," she whispered. "They are coming to complain about the statue." The knock was repeated. It was louder than before, and more impatient. "It's Morris!" cried Julia, in a startled voice, and she ran to the door and opened it. It was indeed Morris that stood before them. Not the Morris of ordinary days, but a wild looking fellow, pale and haggard, with bloodshot eyes, and a 2 days' beard upon his chin. "The barrel!" he cried. "Where's the barrel that came this morning?" And he stared about the lobby, his eyes, as they fell upon the legs of Hercules, literally goggling in his head. "What is that?" he screamed. "What is that waxwork? Speak, you fool! What is that? And where's the barrel? The water butt?" "No barrel came, Morris," responded Julia coldly. "This is the only thing that has arrived." "This!" shrieked the miserable man. "I never heard of it." "It came addressed in your hand," replied Julia. "We had nearly to pull the house down to get it in, and that is all I can tell you." Morris gazed at her in utter bewilderment. He passed his hand over his forehead. He leaned against the wall like a man about to faint. Then his tongue was loosed, and he overwhelmed the girl with torrents of abuse. Such fire, such directness, such a choice of ungentlemanly language, none had ever before suspected Morris to possess. And the girl trembled and shrank before his fury. "You shall not speak to Miss Hazeltine in that way," said Gideon sternly. "It is what I will not suffer." "I shall speak to the girl as I like," returned Morris, with a fresh outburst of anger. "I'll speak to the hussy as she deserves." "Not a word more, sir, not one word," cried Gideon. "Miss Hazeltine," he continued, addressing the young girl, "you cannot stay a moment longer in the same house with this unmanly fellow. Here is my arm. Let me take you where you will be secure from insult." "Mr Forsyth," returned Julia, "you are right. I cannot stay here longer, and I am sure I trust myself to an honourable gentleman." Pale and resolute, Gideon offered her his arm, and the pair descended the steps, followed by Morris clamouring for the latch key. Julia had scarcely handed the key to Morris before an empty hansom drove smartly into John Street. It was hailed by both men, and as the cabman drew up his restive horse, Morris made a dash into the vehicle. "Sixpence above fare," he cried recklessly. "Waterloo Station for your life. Sixpence for yourself." "Make it a shilling, governor," said the man, with a grin. "The other parties were first." "A shilling, then," cried Morris, with the inward reflection that he would reconsider it at Waterloo. The man whipped up his horse, and the hansom vanished from John Street. Chapter 5